Why does this speaker and why does Jeetu Patel matter? We've talked a lot about technology-based disruptions, transformations, et cetera. I can't think of a better company to talk about in terms of how they've made a transition into a lot of the new growing areas of tech today. And Jeetu will get into that. And the expression, we used to say every company is a tech company. Well, every company is a software company is the latest one. And I'm sure when Jeetu heard that, it was completely music to his ears about the role of software. So Jeetu is the Executive Vice President, General Manager of Security and Collaboration business units at Cisco. He's on the executive committee there, and he's part of a broader strategy to really think about the future of work and the future of the enterprise and what the future of the enterprise is about. I met Jeetu several years ago when he was at Box. He was the chief product officer at Box, did an incredible job, and that business scaled up to 60 million users, over 50% using multiple products, in vast majority of the Fortune 500 using their products and service. Before that, Jeetu was the general manager and CEO of EMC's business that they acquired called Simplicity, and that was a cloud service for enterprise applications. He serves on a variety of boards, including JLL, which is an American commercial real estate company, and Equinix, which is an internet company that provides data center services for a variety of companies. He's got a bachelor's degree in information decision sciences from the University of Illinois, Chicago, lives in the Bay Area. And in terms of format, I'm going to ask Jeetu a series of questions, and then we will go to a moderated Q&A. And by the way, we're using Slido as we do for everything. By the way, this is one of a number of companies that Jeetu and Cisco have acquired. And Jeetu, just so you know, we have completely standardized on Slido in all of the Easton Center activities. It works great. And by the way, we're Duo customers. All of you that use Duo, it's now a Cisco company as well. Their market share inside UCLA, I think, is pretty strong. So on questions, just go to slido.com, enter the event code Easton, EASTON. You can either enter your own question or you can upvote one of the existing ones that's there, and I'll endeavor to pose the most popular ones. So Jeetu, first of all, a big welcome, and it's nice to have you here.
Thank you again, Terry. It's good to see you again. It's been a few months since I saw you last, so it's great to see you again.
It is terrific. It has been terrific. And Jeetu, I've got to start with, you've been at Cisco a couple of years now, maybe a little bit more than that. Tell us about the last couple of years, the accomplishments, the learnings, the imperatives, all of that.
Yes, I've been here for about 2.5 years. I think it'll be 3 years in August or July, if I remember correctly. But it's a great company, and I would say of all the companies that I've worked at, this is probably the one that I owe the largest debt of gratitude to, because I'm going to start with a heavy subject. But I just lost my mother last week. So it's been a week and a day, and she was my best friend. Oh. She was sick for about 7 or 8 weeks, and I was sitting by her bedside for several weeks, where we tried everything we could, and then she was going to pass. And during that time is when you actually realize that the culture of the company really matters, and Chuck, who's my boss, who's our CEO, sent me a text, which was a really touching text. He said, "She is right now your only priority. Wow. Don't check work, don't check anything else. She's your only priority." And it was, so anyway, I owe a ton of debt of gratitude to this company. I think it's a fantastic company. And it's one that's operating at scale where, we've got $50 billion in revenue. There's, a couple $100 billion in market cap. But more importantly, what I realized when we were going through the whole kind of pulling out of Russia during the Ukraine-Russia war was when I realized on how significant the company's impact is on the world. Because when we started thinking about saying we're not going to be in Russia for conducting business over there, it was a pretty difficult decision because we were part of the critical infrastructure of the country. And in fact, in any country that we operate in, you're kind of part of the critical infrastructure, because if the network goes down, everything goes down. If WebEx goes down, companies can't communicate with each other. If the security infrastructure goes down, there's a huge amount of impact. So I'd say that my big learning coming here was every decision you make has a level of gravity that's hard to fully fathom when you're coming in, but it's something that you have to just get. You can't screw up too many times because it actually impacts a lot of people's lives.
Excellent. And first of all, very sorry to hear about your mom. I remember, we're going to get into it in a little bit, how profoundly your personal experiences have driven your leadership style, your attitudes, et cetera. And we're going to get into it in a bit, but obviously all of us here extend our condolences to you.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit more, Jeetu, about what's happened. There's been a lot of investments that have occurred at Cisco. There's been a move towards software-based businesses. There's been a move towards just the enterprise and how the enterprise operates. Can you say a bit more about what have been some of those big milestones? So
I think if you think about at least the time that I've been in business, which is about 30 years, which I know all of you in the class might be saying, "Oh, this guy's an old fart," but you'll get there before you know it. Trust me. It's brutal as you get older. But in my time, I've seen a couple major platform shifts, and then I think we're going to see one more that we're in the midst of right now. That's just starting to happen. And so the first platform shift I saw was client-server computing. The second, and when I say I saw it, that's when I was fully in the workforce, could understand the disruptive forces that were at play. And you could see that there were companies that were seeing the train wreck coming, but they couldn't do anything about it because they had waited too long, And then the second major platform shift we saw was the internet. And then the third one was mobile. And I think I'm seeing, we're all going to witness probably the biggest platform shift that we've seen to date thus far, which is AI. And what we can see with AI. And so when you start thinking about these major platform shifts, what is the big lesson to learn for companies is that the profit pool that is dominated by certain companies in a certain era, those might not be the companies that dominate the profit pool in the next era, and the next era, and the next era. And the companies that learn how to do the domination of the profit pool era after era after era are the ones to really learn from. Because the reality is disruption doesn't happen to failed companies. Disruption happens to companies that have been wildly successful, right? Because your margin, as Jeff Bezos says, becomes someone's opportunity, because you've created a level of profit that then becomes someone's opportunity. As you have these kind of disruptive elements that start to come about, it's very hard. It's not that people who are in these companies are dumb and don't get it. It's that the system, it requires a lot of friction to move the system from one place to the other. And it requires a certain level of mindset where for leaders, popularity is not the thing that they have to seek, but the accuracy of the decision that they make is the thing that they have to go out and seek. And those are things that are pretty important as you go into this kind of era. And so what we've seen with Cisco is they've done this a few times over. And we're going through this transformation again, where in fact now we just had our earnings call today. We raised our guide. We had a great earnings call. But the big thing that we want to make sure that we do is shift the business from what used to be classically and traditionally a hardware business to now a subscription software and SaaS business, right?
Yeah.
And that is it's a non-trivial task, because the routes to market that you have to take your product and distribute it to people is now very conditioned to going out and selling hardware, and you have to make sure that entire mindset shifts towards selling software and selling software as a subscription.
Yep.
And still maintaining the hardware base, because you can't completely have that thing hemorrhage and go down quickly. And so those balancing acts are actually a tremendous amount of fun to go through, and it's intellectually a very stimulating exercise to go through. I don't know if I'm answering your question or just rambling. So
no, this is excellent. This is excellent. By the way, what you describe about what happens at companies that get disrupted happens in people's careers as well, doesn't it? Where you see the changes going on, but you kind of have this friction about your view of yourself, and you don't make the adjustments you need to.
Yeah, and frankly, I think we will have the largest shift of knowledge work careers in the next decade that we have seen, even in the next 5 years, where historically what's happened with tech disruptions is the lower order jobs have been the ones that have been disrupted. The blue collar jobs get disrupted, and the truck driver and the people that are kind of doing clerical work, and those jobs get disrupted. Now what you're seeing is the creative jobs are the ones that could get disrupted first. In fact, I was, like I told you, I was in the hospital the past 6-7 weeks. Like that's been the front and center of my mind. Nurses are not going to get disrupted by automation. You will need a nurse no matter what happens, and they will have a tremendous amount of job security. But a radiologist, their job might get disrupted quite a bit, because it might be pretty easy to go out and do a diagnosis of reading an MRI at 10x the accuracy and speed, and then just have a radiologist just go in and do a A-OK on it, rather than having to do all the heavy lifting. And that might mean that you might need fewer number of radiologists. So what do you then do as a professional who's a radiologist to say, how do I keep myself relevant as I go forward? We all have to stay a little paranoid on that front. But it's also very exciting, because if you get used to the ability to just learn new skills. In fact, there's one person in your class right now that I know who's a good friend of mine, Joel Manfredo. I don't know if he's there, if he can raise his hand. I can't see him, but he's probably there somewhere.
Wait a minute, he's in my class and he's not here? Uh-oh.
He told me he was coming.
I have a tough attendance policy. No, I'm kidding. There
so
he
anyway,
is. Okay, he's remote. Yes, good.
Yeah, but he's one of the guys who's actually shifted and changed his career a few times. And done a fantastic job. And so I think we just have to make sure that we all are starting to think about, what is my next job going to be, and how do I go out and condition my brain for that?
Yeah. Let me ask you, just to go a bit deeper on this idea about, disruption happens to successful companies. If I think about it, and forgive me for a second, calling Cisco a legacy tech company, but one that dates back 30 years, huge growth, et cetera. I would put HP maybe in that same category. I'd put IBM in that same category. But I think of Cisco uniquely as making a transformation and increasing its shelf life. If that's a fair summary, how did Cisco do that?
Yeah, I think it's the way that we have done it is there's always been this obsession on innovation. And I think because I'm biased about Cisco, I'm going to give you a couple other examples of companies that do well at this thing. And you're seeing right now they're doing well at it as well. But in the past, what used to be the case was that large companies just were classic victims of the innovator's dilemma. And Clay Christensen, if you folks haven't read the book, by the way, please go read Innovative Dilemma, the Innovative Solution. It's the Bible for tech. But everyone fell into that trap at some point in time because they thought they were on the high end. Someone would come in from the bottom. They're like, no, these people are irrelevant. Before you knew it, they squeezed you out. Now, the large companies have gotten a little smarter because they see what happens around the corner. They've actually seen this history play, this playbook, this movie play out a few times. So what's the secret sauce for companies like Cisco and others who actually do a good job at it? It's a combination of a couple of things. Number one is you have to be very good at organic innovation. If you're bad at organic innovation, it's very hard on a sustained basis to do well. So who are the other companies that have done a fantastic job at this? I think Apple has done a fantastic job at this, right? They disrupt themselves before anyone else disrupts them. When the iPhone came out, iPhone was the biggest killer of the iPod, but they didn't hesitate for a moment because they said, you know what, I'd rather kill my own product than someone else kill my product. And we'll just do a mixed shift of revenue. So they didn't get too attached to their product line. They got attached to the customer's way of solving the problem using their products in the collective, which is very hard to do, by the way, when you have a P&L based org structure, because what happens is everyone goes out and manages their own fiefdom and doesn't want to go out and have their fiefdom be affected. And so you have the org structures really matter in order to create that culture of a company on what to do. Another company that's done a really good job to date, we'll see if they'll actually be able to make the next wave, is Amazon. The third company that I think is doing a remarkable job right now is Microsoft. And what they have done is they've actually got some pretty old legacy technology, but the way in which they've actually created the ecosystem and the platform advantage, even with OpenAI, what they're trying to do right now is truly nothing short of remarkable, because what they did was they said, for example, they were talking about Bing, and they said, all right, Bing is going to be the search engine that we've been trying to get to, but we've never got north of 2.73% market share, while Google has 90%. But now you've got this new thing for OpenAI that they're going to embed into their product. But OpenAI by itself is not as valuable as what they've actually said that Bing is going to do, because it's going to merge search links with the chat area. How has Cisco done this? Well, what Cisco has done is they've taken networking, and from networking, they've actually gone out and captured other adjacencies close to the network that have made the networking franchise stronger. So they started with networking, but they went into voice. And voice was pretty important to go out, because when you have voice going over IP, it just gets more people to buy more routers. And so we actually got really good at voice. When you got the voice piece going, you actually added a contact center to it. Now, contact center uses voice, uses the network. Then you added WebEx to it, because now when you're communicating, if you're communicating with voice, you're also going to communicate with video. So video and voice together with contact center, all together as a suite, then actually sits on top of the network. Those are kind of very, very good ways of thinking of how you build a compounding effect within your franchise. Another area that we're doing right now with is security, with cybersecurity. So what we do is you pick markets that are very large that you can go out and attack because of a durable advantage that you have with something that you're starting with, where you have permission to play in that market. And you have a route to market that can actually be used to leverage that franchise's distribution through. And if you could do that well, you do well. So I actually think there's 6 things a company needs to think about when you're doing well at this. I'm sorry, I'm giving a very long-winded answer. Is that okay to keep going?
This is fascinating. Keep going.
6 things the company needs to think about that make for a great company rather than just a good or a mediocre company. The first one, if there's one area where the students should take notes, it should be this one. This, by the way, it's free advice. You get what you pay for, but I think this framework actually works. The first one is timing. There's a lot of great products at the wrong time that didn't make it. and you don't dictate timing. The market dictates timing. So timing is the most important. And these 6 I'm going to give you are in descending order of importance. But if you don't have all 6, you don't actually do well. So number 1 is timing. Number 2 is the market itself. Is the market large enough that can be attacked bit by bit? Right? And so I need to go after a very large market, but I'm going to be able to take one small piece of it, then another small piece, then another small piece, and that's how you get to it. So timing is the most important. Market is number 2. Number 3 then is team. Now, a lot of people argue that number 2 should be team. After timing, you should have team, and team can determine the market. I've always found that the market always wins. If you've got a great market with a mediocre team, the market will pull you up. You've got a crappy market with a great team, the market will bring you down. Market always wins. So timing, market, team. Number 4 is the origination of the value of a company, which always starts from product. You have to make sure that you have a great product that you're selling to the market. If you don't, then the rest of the stuff doesn't matter. Actually, I fundamentally think it's unethical to take mediocre products and peddle them in the market because there's enough mediocre products in the market. So number 4 is product. So timing, market, team, product. Number 5 then is brand. You have to have a great brand to be able to, one of my mentors used to tell me this, that don't ever go to a company whose brand is lost. It's okay if you go to a company whose product is not quite that great because you can fix that. But once you've actually lost the brand, it's very hard to resurrect back. Like I'll give you an example. Do you think Sybase is coming back anytime soon? No, it's
No.
done. It's over. Game over. And so, so number 5 is brand, and number 6 is something that often gets ignored, especially by product people, but it's so important, is distribution. If you just build it, they don't come. You have to make sure that you build it and get it in the hands of millions of people so that you can actually build something at scale. And whatever the distribution model might be, it might be online direct to consumer, it might be an enterprise sales force, it might be it might be through a kind of 3-tier model or a 3-tier channel. Whatever your model is, you have to keep in mind the route to market and make sure that that distribution is well-oiled machine, because if you have a great product in a great market at the right time with a great team and you have a great brand, and then you can go out and distribute that product to millions of people, that's when magic happens. So timing trumps market, market trumps team, team trumps product, product trumps brand, brand trumps distribution. Don't have all 6, you don't win.
Yeah, you've got to do all of these. You cannot pick and choose. You got to do all these.
You can't pick and choose. Yeah.
Makes sense. By the way, I've realized you could take my job at UCLA. I think you've got the technology, strategy, everything. Anytime you want to roll here, you let us know.
I think the second lecture would be very boring.
I don't think so. I don't think so. So let's move on now. You alluded to this kind of next platform change, which is in artificial intelligence. You talked about OpenAI. Tell us about this kind of transformation in the AI platform.
Yeah, I think if you see, AI has been talked about for a long time, but I think what OpenAI did with DALL-E and ChatGPT, which by the way, I don't think are the fundamental transformative shifts of AI yet. I think they're just the starting point that have given an illustration of what this could be and how powerful it could be. AGI, the artificial general intelligence, will be the next wave, which I think we are still a few years out for. But what the beauty about AI now, that what you're starting to see is it's creating this ability to have a very different kind of relationship between a human and a machine. So up until now, that relationship has always been a very sterile relationship where it required a human to get trained on the machine, and you had to adjust to the contours of the machine rather than the machine adjusting to you, right? Now, all of a sudden, what happens is it's natural language and it's conversation. and it's going to be in any language, and that then influencing how user experiences will get created, that influencing how data will get processed, that influencing how data will get rendered, is going to open up possibilities where every job in some way or form could be reimagined for the better. Now, I think, by the way, I think there's a lot of downside to AI as well, if not done in a proper way. And that's specifically on the AGI side. When you get to artificial general intelligence, that's when the computer starts to have emotion and ambition, just like a human does. It can do everything a human can do. And then if it gets in the wrong hands, boy, you could have a world of hurt. So like, I think it's, there's going to be a lot of work that's going to be done in the field to make sure that, the responsible ethical use of AI is actually being thought about very, very deeply. But right now, when you start thinking about, Chat GPT, even in its early incarnation, which is like, it's still pretty rough, right? But you go out and ask some basic questions, like product marketing people will have a tremendous amount of an assistant for AI. Developers will be able to get the first draft of the code written without having to ever write it. You think about a product manager that needs to think about the next set of features, they'll be able to do it. The beauty about what's happening with AI now is it's not just regurgitating content, it's creating original content based on the quality of questions that you ask. And so as a result, one of the skills that we'll have to develop as we move forward, we have always developed a skill of knowing how to know the right answer. I think the more important skill moving forward is going to be knowing how to ask the right questions in the right way.
Excellent. And Jeetu, tell us more for Cisco, what all of these developments in AI, open AI, et cetera, what does that mean for Cisco and its offerings?
Yeah, so I think if you think, whether it's OpenAI or some other company, who cares, but the large language models and the natural language infusion into the way that human interfaces will be built with computers is actually very interesting. So think about it today. How is today's best user experiences been built? They are built with point and click. I point and I click. That has a finite capacity of how many things you can point to and how many things you can click at. And right now, if you think about one of the fundamental flaws in software design today, what is that fundamental flaw? That you build features and you keep adding more and more and more. And by the time you get to version 12 or 13, you might not know it because the product managers building it have actually drunk too much of their own Kool-Aid, but the product's gotten harder to use than the second or third version. They needed to stop at some point and they just kept adding more crap. It's because there was a finite number of pixels that you had, and when you clutter, the human brain can only process so much. When you clutter all of that up front, it just gets to be very difficult to go out and use these systems. And so these systems were very hard to use. As you move forward, natural language might actually change the interface paradigm for these systems completely. They might change the quality of responses that you get back, and that you don't need to know everything, but whatever you need to know is there at your fingertips. Those are kind of, like the first version of that was search, but with search, 50% of it was wrong half the time. But now when you think about every interface, so for example, at Cisco, I run one of the, I run the security business and the collaboration business. One of the biggest challenges you have in the security business is that there's 4 million jobs that go unfilled every year. And so you don't have these security practitioners that are there to actually keep you safe in most companies. And as a result, most companies are vulnerable because anyone can come in and attack them and you wouldn't know anything, or you wouldn't know what's happening. Now imagine if the bar for actually managing these systems went down dramatically. So today, Terry, if you were an IT administrator at Cisco and Jeetu joined Cisco, you would have to go out and create a policy for Jeetu saying, allow Jeetu to do X, Y, Z, don't allow Jeetu to do ABC, right? He's allowed to get into these spaces, but not allowed to get into these spaces. Allow and block is basically what security is. Now imagine in the future, if you just said the policy would be very intent-based. You said, any new employee that comes in, or Jeetu is a new employee that's come in, who is an executive that works for Chuck, make sure that you set the appropriate policy for him for access rights. And the system would be smart enough to know what role I play and be able to just give me a proposal of the kind of policies it's setting. And I just have to review that policy and hit OK. The friction goes down dramatically in what happens. So I think like that's just one example. And there's thousands of such examples on how the experience will get better. The quality of output will get better. The way in which the system interacts with you will get better. The accuracy with which you can actually get to your answer gets better. All of these things will actually be instructed with AI. It's not just for, like, for example, in the next 5 years, if I wanted to design a screen, I can actually tell the AI chatbot saying, design a screen for me with, and it won't even take 5 years. It'll be ready in like 12 to 18 months in a very high fidelity. Design a screen for me with this kind of a minimalist design framework that can allow me to do these 3 things on the screen. And here will come a Figma file for the screen. And boy, that's actually a very, very different way to go out and do everything compared to what we've been doing. Now, once I've designed that screen, I can say, go out and write the starter piece of code for me. And then that gets written. And then say, all right, fine. Make sure that you're writing copy for me for the content that's going to go into this. And it'll write you the copy. And so write a job description for me for a new person that I'm trying to hire for an engineer, and write your job description. Give me the questions that I need to interview with someone, and it gives you the questions. Like, there's a lot of assistance that we will all get that we didn't have in the past. And I think that aid will be good to get. On the other hand, I think we have to always make sure that the displacement of jobs that'll happen, I think it's the tech company's responsibility to make sure that that displacement does not create too much pain for humanity. And we have to do that in a better way than we've done in the past disruptions.
Let me ask you a couple questions now. You were talking about OpenAI, you were talking about ChatGPT. If you were Sundar Pichai at Google looking at, you've got this massive profitable business that's search, and now you've got players like Bing that are enabled here. Would you be worried and saying, you know what, this giant profit pool, to your point earlier, may come under attack?
I think if I am any company in the world in the tech business, which, by the way, is any company in the world in any business these days, I would be very worried about not having a monopoly sustain forever. It's just not going to sustain forever, because I think it's, the market, when it moves really fast. So if I were Sundar right now, and they have done this, so it's not like they're not smart people. They had built a large language model. It's not that they're not built one. What's actually interesting is, I don't think Sam Altman at OpenAI knew how big and how quickly in 60 days, they got to 100 million users, right?
Yeah.
That is not something that is a normal course of action. I don't think Sam knew that it was going to get to 100 million users in 60 days. So when something takes off, there's a tipping point and it just takes off. Sundar has a different set of challenges. Sundar cannot be as bold as what Sam was, because the repercussions from the market would be much higher if Google started giving you the wrong answers. But if a startup gives you the wrong answers, it's like, all right, fine, whatever. And so he does have a hard problem to solve. He owns 90% of the market.
Yep.
But I think the biggest challenge he has is not a technological one. I think the biggest challenge that Google has right now is a cultural one, because Google's culture is very much around everyone is included in the decision-making process. And you can have a single person veto any decision. It's not like, this is anecdotal. I have never worked at Google, but this is what I hear from the outside. A lot of people have a lot of opinions, and anyone can kill your idea. By the way, that's not that different from any large company where you ask enough number of people, someone's going to say no.
Right.
And so what you have to do is you have to have a little bit more and at moments like this of a directive that is given from the top that says, we are going to go out and have this be the one big thing that we cannot fail in. And you have to give air cover to the people that are going to be building that piece of technology to not be bogged down by anyone. I'll tell you an example of what Microsoft had done with this in the past when Satya had just come on board. Windows ran the show at Microsoft, right? And anyone that came into Windows, anyone that came in and wanted to build something, Windows would say, you know what, I'm not going to allow you to do that, so you're not going to do it. Windows and Office basically ran the show. And then what Satya did was he changed the paradigm immediately the moment he came on board. He said, you know what, the application developer, all I'm going to measure you on is how many users you get. But I don't care what OS you're running on. You can run on Windows, let them earn the spot so that you can build for them. But you can also run on iOS and you can also run on Android. You can run on any of the OSs. All I'm going to measure you on is, can you get active use? And what that did was change the power dynamic in the organization almost overnight. And I think you have to make sure that when you're going through a moment like what Google is going through, that there is air cover for those people where you have to change the power dynamic so that they've got the air cover. Otherwise, it can't happen. I'll tell you what, Chuck gave me that air cover when I first came in because WebEx was in a world of hurt. You know, Zoom had become the verb. And we had to come in and say, okay, what do we do? This product is going down every 3 minutes and it's like, it's a terrible experience and all of that. And he said, do what you need to do. I got your back. And a lot of people came to me with ideas at the time. Jeetu, I think we need to do this. I think we need to do this. And I had my blinders on. I'm like, thank you, but no thanks. We're going to build a product with a small team of people. This is what we're going to do. We're very clear on what we want to do. We're not confused. We might be wrong, but we're not going to be confused. And during this time, I might piss you off, but I don't care because we need to go out and get this done.
Yeah.
And if Chuck had not given me the air cover, I would have never been able to get it done. You know, and then within a matter of like 12 months, we had 1,800 features that came out. We became the leader on in the Magic Quadrant. The entire momentum of the business shifted. But that happened because you actually had that air cover. That cultural shift has to happen at Google. Because if Google continues to be in the analysis paralysis phase when it comes to some of these pieces, then they'll have a hard time. But if they continue to have the air covers that this is code red, which they've done, and we're going to go out and do this, then it's a matter of like, you know, they've got a durable advantage in something, and they can actually use that advantage along with AI. What Bing is saying they can do, Google will do better than Bing, because you know, inherently Google's a better product than Bing.
Yeah.
You know, it's just a matter of that they have to make sure that they get there and they get there fast. And by the way, when these disruptions happen, you're a race against time. You have to get to product before your competition, that's the startup, gets to distribution. That's the race. Yep.
Makes a lot of sense. Let me ask you then on its broader level, you know, one of the things we cover in class is competing in an age of AI. So it's the work that's gone on with Kareem Lakhani at Harvard Business School that basically says there's an advantage to digital first companies and larger companies that create a data flywheel that creates increasing returns to scale that allows them to move cross boundary. Amazon going into healthcare, Google going into transportation with Waymo, and it's basically scale is your friend.
Scale is your friend.
You talk about, you know, OpenAI and ChatGPT and the ability for Bing to move in. Is there an argument here that actually says things are going to start tilting the other direction? That there's been kind of this democratization of data, and many small companies can become very notable competitors compared to this argument that says big players have got a natural advantage here?
In the conventional wisdom in the past is that big players have actually had a natural disadvantage because the smaller players were nimble enough to go out and innovate something and be able to get to distribution faster than the big players were able to get to product, right?
Yeah.
So the reason that the large companies have failed in the past is because of their size, not as a function of their size. You know, I mean, not in spite of the size. They failed because of the size.
Yeah.
What's happened over time is that these large companies have learned how to organize where their size doesn't become an impediment, but actually becomes a propellant. And so how does that happen? Well, the way in which you structure it, like for example, Amazon has this great thing that we shamelessly copy as well, which is this notion of 2 pizza teams. And 2 pizza teams is don't create a team of people that can be fed by more than 2 pizzas, because the moment you do that, you are actually now just instilling a lot of overhead of alignment. Alignment, most people think is a good word. When alignment gets to be 80% of the job, you're not building. 80% of the time you should be building, 20% of the time you should be aligning. The overhead of alignment should be no more than 20%. If it becomes 80%, you've lost the plot. When does it become 80%? When you have 150 people on a team and you're trying to keep everyone aligned. If you have 8 people on a team, you don't have to keep everyone aligned for more than 20% of the time. And so how do you get that small 2 pizza team to work? Well, what you do is you construct a model which actually gives autonomy to people with these small teams. And then as the jobs scale, you create many, many more of those teams, but keep the units of work small. What does that require? That requires that the mindset that people have is not that I'm going to come in and pee on a territory and try to get to a large number of people underneath me. The mindset they need to have is I am going to go out and infuse growth. And I'm going to get rewarded and promoted and paid based on whether or not I create growth in the business, not based on me being a custodian of a very large business. So one of the first things I did when I joined Cisco is I actually gave up one of the businesses. I told Chuck, I'm like, you've given me 3 businesses to run. This third one doesn't make any sense. I don't think I should run it. So in the first 2 weeks, I said, you should give it to someone else because I don't think I'm going to be able to do a good job with it. This is very counterintuitive for most people, because most people want to accumulate scope, because the way that they get promoted and get a larger title is based on more that you have. And I'm like, I would probably be able to get the size of what I'm doing to be larger by growing it more rather than by accumulating a bunch of assets that I can't even go out and focus on properly. And so as the folks in your class think about this, be very intentional on not taking on too much in a company, because the conventional wisdom says that you will not get promoted if you don't have enough amount of scope. Be very deliberate in what you want to take on, and whatever you take on, make sure that it's got a tailwind behind it for growth. And then that, so going back to your question on the AI side, it's going to be very interesting in this next wave to think about the kind of unique value that can be created through AI in every product category, because everything will get refactored. Like one of my friends, Aaron, who runs Box, had a great tweet. He said, OpenAI, basically what they did was they said, to all the companies in the world, sorry, but you're all going to have to refactor your strategy in the next 60 days. And that's kind of what happened.
Wow. It's
and,
true.
And I do think like that's important, is you have to make sure that you're actually creating asymmetric moves in the market with small teams, because the power of small teams can't be overstated. Apple is very good at this. At the very inception, the number of people that actually built iOS was less than 50. Think about that.
Yeah. Amazing leverage. Amazing. Let me ask you a couple of items that are getting into kind of broader leadership and societal issues, and then I want to take the student questions here. So you alluded to, when you think about technology and society, we have a bunch of technologies that are going to create productivity and empower employees and do a lot of great things. The flip side, and you alluded to it though, is it may fundamentally eliminate jobs. And I always kind of think of autonomous vehicles with truck drivers and bus drivers. There's 4 million in the US. I think of call center employees, and you think there's maybe 5 to 10 million in the US. Your example of radiologists and, the ability to get better and better at radiology for what is a fixed market. Unless you say the market's getting a lot bigger, as each radiologist gets more productive, you don't need as many of them in a fixed market. What is going to happen here? Is your view is that there's going to be a net reduction of jobs because we can't create enough new stuff in the economy, that we're going to have a net reduction of jobs, and that there's got to be some sort of broader corporate societal approach to how do you manage these major transitions?
So I'll tell you what the corporate line is that most large company CEOs will say, and then I'll tell you what I think could happen. So the corporate line that most large companies will say is, I don't believe in this zero-sum mentality. You will have more jobs and there'll be different things that people do and people will just get more productive. That's the corporate line that everyone will say.
Yeah.
The reality is it could go one or two ways. That could be a scenario, or it could be a scenario that a lot of people end up losing a lot of jobs. But the new jobs that get created are created in a different field with a different vocation and a different skill set than the one that the existing jobs were in, and that people are going to have to get reskilled and retrained. The question is not whether or not there'll be more jobs. The question is, what is the disruption of the reskilling and retraining during that time period? And what are we going to be doing about it so that the suffering doesn't get caused? Because when the steel mill disruption happened with the mini mill, and when there's like disruptions that have happened in the past with any of the jobs with a new thing, the folks, imagine if you're someone who is in his or her late 50s or 60s, and you've got another 5 years to go before retirement. And now all of a sudden, everything that you knew gets thrown out the window and you have to start fresh.
Yep.
Well, you might actually suffer during those 5 years in a pretty profound way.
Yeah.
And that causes human suffering that I think Silicon Valley specifically has been completely oblivious to in the past. And we have not taken responsibility for saying, what do we need to do to go out and reskill and retrain people in a way that that jarring effect does not happen for people.
Yeah. And isn't there, Jeetu, a geographic overlay that exacerbates this? So absolutely. It's the fact that there's a lot of truck drivers in Joplin, Missouri, not on the two coasts where the tech companies tend to be, makes it even worse.
Yes, yes. And so I think what we have to think about is, as this displacement starts to happen, and platform shifts are inevitable. In the capitalistic society, platform shifts will happen. As platform shifts happen, every subsequent platform has gotten to more number of users in a more compressed amount of time than the previous platform shift. Right? If you just assume that it's going to happen faster, every single subsequent platform shift, then what we have to think about is, what are we going to do as a society to make sure that it doesn't create that much pain for those folks, because the reskilling might not happen as fast as the shift happened of the platform. What are we going to do to make that happen? And in my mind, that reskilling shift, something like universal basic income in the next decade might be a necessity. I believe it will be a necessity. I don't think you will actually have to just say survival of the fittest, Darwinian wins. I think today the capitalistic society works well, but I think within the next few years, as these platform shifts get faster and faster and faster, you might need to have some cushion for people.
Yep. So let me ask you again on a macro level. You look at the major geographies in the world. You look at China, US, Europe, and India, and ask yourself, which of these regions are most likely to be able to manage that transition that you described? Is the US actually not in as good a place? It's done so well as kind of laissez-faire, entrepreneurial, free enterprise, but kind of government stay aside. It goes back to the Revolutionary War with the British. Is the US actually not well positioned, and thus companies are going to have to do more than what we would think government needs to do?
I'm a believer in the resilience of the United States. What I do feel the US has to do better is our regulatory environment is going to have to get far more sophisticated than what it is right now. It's as you start to see concentration of power by large companies, you have to make sure that there's sophisticated regulatory environments that know how to act responsibly, but also nimbly, without vilifying companies, to say, what do we need to do to make sure that this is right for the consumer? And I don't think we're quite there yet as a country. I think we have a long way to go on that front. So we do need to do a better job on that front. But I believe in the resilience of the US because of a couple of different dimensions. One is, I fundamentally believe in inherent power of immigration that this country has operated with in the past. If we lose that, I think we will lose a lot, right? There's a lot of people right now that actually immigrated to this country and added a lot of value to this country. We cannot actually vilify those people coming in. You have to make sure that you open the doors for the best talent to come into your land to go out and operate. So that's important. Number two, I think what's going to be important is the general level of creativity and entrepreneurialism that the US has, I think is still unique, in the education system. That actually stems from the education system. And I think the third one is the integrity of the capital markets. I know that many people roll their eyes going, oh, I don't know. But I mean, there is a level of discipline and structure in the way that the capital markets work here that's not quite the same as every other part of the world. And that gives us an advantage, And so I think there's a lot of kind of good advantages to being part of the US, but I think we should stay paranoid. China has some advantages, but it also has some disadvantages in the population mix that they have. I think India has a lot of advantage in that there's a lot of people in the right working class of the population. And so as a result, they've got the most amount of kind of productive workforce that they'll have over time. And that's actually a huge advantage for them. And I'd say that, across the board, there's risk in every country, and I think there's opportunity that every country has. But the risk that we would have is if our social constructs don't get better, if racism and gender bias and all of those things actually continue to be subpar, it'll hurt us as a country. And so for the new leaders that are coming out, bringing on diverse teams and making sure there's women and people of color and folks that actually come from different kind of orientations and backgrounds are represented in that group is really important, because if you're going to serve a population of the global market, you better have a population representative of that global market and who's building that product on your end and who is taking that product to market. If you don't, then you don't understand your target market. And so this is a better business decision. It's not just what's right for the big world. It's a better business decision to do it that way. And so I do feel like there's risk that the US has. I don't feel like it's anywhere close to throwing in the towel. We're still the best country in the world to be in. And I actually believe in the US. I do feel like the other countries, the gap and the fascination, like in my time when I first came here at 19, my dream, my lifelong dream was I want to live in the United States of America. And even to this day, when I walk around, I pinch myself a little bit. I don't think the next generation has that fascination. And that fascination helped us attract the best talent, but we have kind of lost a little bit of that magnet, and we need to go out and create that magnet again.
Yeah, excellent points. Excellent. Let me ask you one last question, then I want to take a couple of the student questions, and we'll call it a wrap. When you spoke a couple of years ago with us, you had a fascinating personal story about adversity, and it became an integral part of how you look at managing, in your life as a leader, as a business person, as an individual, et cetera. Think about the adversity that people have today. I mean, the job market is not great. You talk about the inequalities that people are continuing to experience, et cetera. If you don't mind, tell us a bit of your kind of advice about dealing with adversity and what allows for a better outcome.
I think the reality is every person in the world has ups and downs. I don't care who they are, they have ups and downs. The richest people in the world do, the poorest people in the world do, the smartest people do, the dumbest people do. Everyone has ups and downs. It's how you respond to those adverse events in life that really matter, And so I think I might have shared this story with you, Terry, and if it's okay, I'll just share it again with the class.
Yeah, please do.
So I grew up, and my dad was a high stakes con man. He used to actually swindle people for money. So he was the Indian version of Bernie Madoff. And it was actually very dangerous for me to be in the country. And so I actually left the country at some point in time because it was safe for me to physically be there. We actually kept my mother in an undisclosed place for a while because he was abusive to her. He used to beat her up. And so we had to keep her in an undisclosed location while I went out and tried to make a living in America. And then I didn't see my mother for 7 years before I brought her here. It was a rough time, like I lived on $2 or $3 a day, and it was a rough time. But what that did for me was created a degree of hunger to say, I have to just make sure I look after my mom and me. Which is why it was so hard to lose her last week, because it was just the two of us for the longest time, and I'll give you a story of how this transpired when I went back to India. So I didn't go back to India. I left in 1991. My dad died in 2004. I went back for a quick visit. And then I never went back until 2017 for the first time. And I took my daughter to the Taj Mahal. It's a monument in the world in Agra, and I wanted to take her there. She was old enough to actually appreciate it. So we went there, and we had this tour guide. His name was Raj. And he decided to kind of show us around. And boy, that guy knew his product inside and out. I don't know if he was making shit up, but he knew exactly what the stories were behind why every decision was made in the Taj Mahal the way it was made. And when we were going through this, he would have people walk by and he would talk to them in different languages. So the person comes from a Chinese couple would walk by and he'd bust out in Mandarin, and someone else would come by and he'd bust out in German and in French and in Russian and of course Hindi and English and in a bunch of other Indian languages. At some point in time, I looked at him like, dude, how many languages do you speak? Well, I speak like 8 or 9, but I try to learn a new language every year because I feel like my customers are tourists and I need to make sure that I'm honoring them by speaking a language to them. Now, this guy made legit probably like $10 a day, and as I thought about that, I'm like, wow, this guy is probably smarter than every single executive member at Box, what I was part of at the time, and is better than any salesperson that we have. The only difference between him and me is that I have a platform and he doesn't have a platform. I had a platform of tech. I had a platform of America. I had a platform of being able to, have education. All of these platforms that I had allowed me to propel forward, whereas this guy was not able to go out and propel forward because he didn't have a platform. But intellectually, he had a lot of horsepower. And that told me, like, if we keep in mind that if we do get a platform, let's please make sure we don't waste it. And we utilize it in such a way where we don't get too bogged down with the small little entitlements about life, but really try to see if you can make the world a better place as a result of the platform you have. I think the world just, that's what the world deserves from us. And we are all very privileged. Just sitting in this setting right now, we are all very privileged to have this. So that's the way I look at adversity. Is it's an opportunity to kind of overcome so that we can do something good for the world. And by the way, when you're doing that, you're doing pretty well for yourself as well. So it's not like that's ignored. You end up doing pretty well when you do well for the world.
Excellent. Let me ask you 2 quick student questions, and then we'll call it a wrap.
Yeah.
First one is, who is the biggest threat to Cisco that you see? And second one is the WebEx story and how you look at Zoom. I felt so guilty we're using Zoom today, but how do you look at Zoom and what's gone on there and the imperative that it creates for you at WebEx?
Yeah, so I think the biggest threat for Cisco are companies that have not yet started that could actually take us down because they do something innovative where we miss what's around the corner. It's very seldom a company that's already there. It's more than often a company that's not yet surfaced up yet. And so you have to stay paranoid about innovation. And the only way to stay ahead is make sure that you have different types of innovation models in your organization. You have the ones which are constantly optimizing models. We perform better and better and better and just optimize. You have ones that are fundamentally transformative, that can change the game. And then you have ones that are incubating all the time. And each one of those require a different kind of governance structure. If you try to get a performance operating model and try to make sure that you jam it into the incubation framework, you will actually find that you're woefully kind of disadvantaged. So Jeffrey Moore, who is a great person, has written a great book called Zone to Win. Read that book if you folks get a chance. That's a really good book on this whole concept. We use it quite a bit. So there are people that are incubating that don't get the same set of metrics that they have to be accountable for as the ones that are running large businesses, because they're different businesses, a different size, scale, and maturity, and you have to kind of think about that. But if you do that, then your future competitors, you will not be surprised by them, and you have to stay constantly paranoid. What was your second question? The
WebEx story and how you think about Zoom.
Yeah, so that's an example of where we let our eye off the ball, and a company like Zoom got created. Zoom was not particularly an original company. It is actually a very mediocre company. All they did was created a product which had good quality and good video codecs and good audio codecs. And we should have done that in the first place. And so, by the way, they are now in a world of hurt. Zoom just laid off a bunch of people. They're actually, they've slowed down their revenue. I think, companies like Microsoft and us have caused a fair amount of kind of, pain for them. So they're in a world of hurt. However, the reason that they were created was because of our incompetence at Cisco. We owned the market and we let it go. And we can't ever forget when that happens. And to make sure that we don't do the internal bureaucracy and the internal kind of fighting can't supersede who you're trying to fight on the outside. Because when people start to go out and have a fiefdom they create internally, and they don't actually innovate on the areas that they need to because they're trying to get ahead for themselves, that's when these things happen. So one of the things I think about is always be obsessed about the customer and work backwards from there. And you will always do it. Whenever you're confused about whether or not a strategy is working or not working, don't think about your business model. Don't think about what's going to be right for your business or not. Think about, is it right for the customer? If it's right for the customer and you do what's right for the customer, eventually you will get rewarded. You will earn their loyalty. And when you earn their loyalty, the margin profile is going to be far greater than any individual transaction you do with that customer.
Excellent. Jeetu, let me do this. I always like to summarize what my takeaways are.
I love the summaries that you always have.
Please let me know if you've got upgrades, and if you don't, final word from you. So I got several kind of takeaways here. This broader idea about disruptions that happen in every level, individual level, company level, and the speed at which they occur, and the imperatives for all of us as leaders to think about how do you adapt and who is the unknown disruptor that's out there is gigantic. This is more monumental than what Clay Christensen would have even identified. So that to me is the first takeaway. The second one is a series of your kind of leadership philosophies that allow you to create this longer runway of success. So being obsessed with innovation, being obsessed with the customer. Don't let the metrics, the other things, kind of crowd out what should be, who is the customer, what problem am I solving, how do I create a set of systems that allow me to innovate. Third major point that I got is this 6-item list of all the things that leaders have to put together to make it work, which is a bit daunting because you said, yes, they're in descending order, but you got to do all of them. You can't pick and choose. It was timing. It was the market itself. It was the team. It was the product and the value that it creates. It's the brand and the reputation, and it's distribution. You got to do all of those things to create a good outcome. Fourth item I got was just the role of technology changes. And you talked about artificial intelligence, you talked about OpenAI, you talked about ChatGPT, and you didn't talk about it as a one-trick pony. You talked about it as a fundamental change in the experience between humans and machines, about the types of companies that are going to win, about the pace of innovation. You basically said these things are transformational ones, and you've got to have some sort of eye on that. You also talked about the more money that you make, the more profit pool that you've got, the more you are going to be attacked. That's right. And no matter how great the companies are that we see out there, there are many of them that have got some major challenges on their side. And then the final items I've got is just, I think in some ways the most interesting thing just about you is how you've let your personal experiences become a fundamental part of your leadership mission, how you think about technology, how you think about teams, how you think about communicating. Ultimately, you've got to be somebody who cares about the individual, but you've also got to make sure the team is successful. And in life is not so easy as picking one side of an ideological battle, but to find what is the right cake mix here that creates these great outcomes. Those are the things I took away. Any upgrades or final comments you've got?
Maybe I'll just add a couple more that might be worth the class to take away. Firstly, life is full of grayscale, not black and white. And so just know that these things are just guiding principles, but the quality of problem that we all choose to pick to spend our time on is going to be directly proportionate to the success of the outcome. And that's very counterintuitive. What that means is the harder the problem that you pick, the likelihood of success that you have is far greater than the easier the problem you pick to solve. And why is that the case? It's because when you pick really hard problems, you attract really good people to come solve those really hard, important problems. And business is a team sport. And if you have the best people, then you end up winning. And so pick really hard problems, attract the best people, because that's what's going to, so the quality of the problems is really important. The second ask I'd have is, be very clear on the metrics of success and failure that you're trying to pursue. Because oftentimes those can get confused as you're going through this. The third and last piece that I would say is important is, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but if you are going to be a leader in a place, make sure you pick a few of the stars, and ideally pick the stars that would have otherwise not had the privilege of finding someone like you to act as a mentor to them, and selflessly give them the assistance and the kindness and the coaching and the direction and the love. Because when you do, you will create someone else that blossoms, which would have had a very unique perspective. And ideally do that with someone who has a diverse background from yours, not the same background as yours. And so then that way you can cross-pollinate. And I think the more we get, I am a big believer that women in business are hugely important. So if, I try to create teams which are 50-50, and gender diversity, and also of course have transgender mix and all of that. But we as a company at Cisco have focused a lot on this, and we have a lot more work to do. But every single person over here in the next couple of decades, we should not be talking about this issue anymore because it's a non-issue. We should have solved this problem by then, and it should be solved. It's a shame that it's not solved, and we owe it to ourselves for the next generation to make sure we solve it.
Yeah. Jeetu, let me just say, I cannot thank you enough. It's such an interesting, we talk about flywheels and virtuous cycles. I was just jotting a note here. You've got a virtuous cycle about humanity, about just your personal experiences and how they've created certain outcomes that's affected your leadership style and how you interact with people and lead organizations, that's allowed you to do well in technology and innovation, et cetera. And I just want to thank you. You're one of the very few that puts all of those things together in such an important way. And I just want to thank you because the learnings for all the people here today has been huge. So I hope we can have you back again soon, and a massive thank you.
Terry, I'll come to your class anytime you invite me. Thank you again for having me.